suddenly goes away, I'll just come back in.
Hi, everyone. I'm Linda Sheldon-Feld with the International Grief Institute, and this is Moments of Hope, a show featuring people who turn pain into purpose to do good things in the world. And tonight we are talking about grief in the church. And my expert guest here is Reverend Roland Johnson. Reverend Johnson, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so for those of you who are waiting, thanks so much for your patience. We were working hard to get Reverend Johnson in on the technology here. It was working against us tonight, but we did it. That's what perseverance and patience is all about. So, Reverend Johnson, may I call you Roland?
Please do.
All righty. So thank you. First off, it's been said that we worship together, but we grieve alone. Why do so many people feel as though churches are not equipped to handle their own bereaved congregant members?
I think a lot of it really has to do with the modernization of church itself. We've moved the death and dying experience out of the church. We've moved it out of the home. We've moved it into those invisible places. Hospital rooms, even death at home goes straight to a coroner unless you've got pre-legals done. It's been moved away, and we've had now a 50-year span of progressive impersonalization of death. So that we come back into the church, we might do a memorial service, but the connectivity that church and community were so closely tied together has broken down to a large degree by the family has changed structure. Families have broken down. We've become much more blended in terms of families, community, and structure. Church has tended to follow what society is. And so as a consequence, I think that's what we're really seeing is that the church has become accustomed to providing in the way that people are used to, which is limited contact. In the same way that if you're grieving, you might send a text to the person that, or if you got a friend that lost somebody, you get on your phone and you send them a text saying, "I'm so sorry for your loss." So that the face-to-face contact, we don't have the practice in as much.
Ah, that makes a lot of sense. There is, to some degree, disillusioned, disillusionment that happens when people who have a very strong faith and have been members of the church for a very long time suddenly lose someone they love. And it is true that in today's society, we are just not equipped to know what to do. Intuitively, we are not sure what to do to comfort someone. It's hard for us to see someone in pain, and that includes emotional pain. We're fixers. We want to fix it. And grief is not something that we can fix for somebody. Right. It is a rite of passage. It is a process of reconciliation. And so for many people, it makes them feel awkward. And going back to the church, part of, I think, the challenge is a lot of people says, well, just give it to God, give it up to God. And, how do you respond to that? When someone says, give it up to God, to some degree that robs you of that opportunity to process your loss.
Oh, very much so. And I think right now in training churches and training a church, teaching a class at church on how to support others that have experienced a loss, I find myself amazed, is that a good word, at how many people are so uncomfortable because they literally say to me, I have no idea what to say.
Yeah.
I have no idea what to do. I don't want to do something wrong and make it worse.
So they do nothing at all.
So they do nothing at all.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
But look at, let's use a different example, because I was using the term grief first aid in the class I was teaching last night. And I was using that term because, much in the same way that, look at how our society now tells you, if you come up on a wreck, don't do anything and let the professionals handle it. So that we've got this kind of social attitude that says, don't get involved in case you mess up. And it's better to wait till somebody that really knows what they're doing gets there. When I was a young man, we were taught to immediately give first aid,
Right.
to immediately give support. And that was standard training. I mean, in the school, when I was in elementary school, we were literally, in the same way the firemen taught us, stop, drop, and roll if you caught on fire. We were instructed on what to do if somebody
Right.
was bleeding.
Right.
We were, and but this, even socially now, I mean, in the schools they literally say, call the nurse, don't touch them. uh,
Uh,
call the EMTs, don't touch them. If somebody's in a bad car wreck, wait for assistance, don't touch them, don't remove them, because you might do more harm moving them. That
well,
same model, I'm sorry, go ahead.
but I think that a lot of people, the church is a place of comfort, right?
Yes, sure.
And from my own experience of losing a daughter 10 years ago, my faith gave me great comfort.
Yes.
But I have to say that comfort didn't come from the church. It came
Right.
from my faith with God. But in doing the Grief Diary series, we've got over 700 writers around the world, and a lot of them felt as though their religion let them down, that their church let them down. It was a place that they felt they would find comfort, and they felt very alone. And I want to read a couple of examples for you to think about. One of them is it was written in Christianity Today in 2015 by Philip Kenyon, and it's titled "Why We Fail the Grieving." And he said that when his father died of cancer, people at church looked at him, but nobody ever sent a card or expressed tangible support. He was left alone to navigate the waters of grief. And he said he remembers standing in the sanctuary, and there were people kind of on the other side looking at him, but then looking away, looking at him, then looking away. And he felt like he had what he called grief pox, like he had
Right.
a contagious disease. And not one of them came over to comfort him. He also talked about in this article that he wrote for Christianity Today, he says, one woman's son went off to a Bible college and he died by suicide. The president of the college told the mother that since her son was a Christian, there was no reason to mourn because her son was in heaven. So for years, she bore the burden of not expressing her grief. And we know what happens. Silent grief is deadly grief, because grief is something that has to be externalized in order to be processed. The only way that we reconcile the loss in our heart is to process it. And that
Sure.
includes externalizing it. And so when we carry that burden in our heart, we're never allowed that opportunity to reconcile it. And so the second article I want to bring up is in Religion News Service. It was written by Caitlin Curtis in February 2019, so just a year ago. And she says, grief hides in the church bathroom. And she says that a woman lost her 8-month-old baby, and in the middle of worship, the woman went to the bathroom. So Caitlin followed her, and in the bathroom, she found the woman crying. And so together they got on the bathroom floor, and she held the woman who was wailing by then. And people came in and out of the bathroom, and not one single person stopped to help. And so she was the one who said, we worship together and grieve alone. And so was that a church thing, or was that a societal issue where we just don't know what to do no matter what the setting?
I think, okay, I think we're looking at kind of a, it's multifaceted in that there's been dramatic changes in the last 50 years. The 50-year change changed how seminaries train pastors,
Hmm.
how staff is trained, how, because of even the battles within churches over what social morals, what social behaviors are correct or incorrect, right or wrong. Once again, there's been this general loss on individuals. When I tell people that if they believe in Jesus, if they are Christians, that they need to wear their Christianity, not talk their Christianity, that when somebody's grieving, we share what is the meaning of Scripture or the Bible is much more important than saying, well, Matthew 5:4 says, if you mourn, you'll be comforted. Or this scripture says this, and quoting Bible verses, instead of saying, when I hurt, this is significant to me, maybe this will help you. Um, you know, to actually say to people, if you don't know what to say, stand there silently and just be present. And people look so amazed. And what you were saying about grief contagion is amazing because uh, that was something we very much talked about last night. Um, we had, I lost my mom very recently, and then just last week lost a cousin. Um, and I actually had somebody say to me, well, it comes in threes, so just be prepared for somebody we know is going to die now. And I was like, where is this thinking kind of coming from? And it comes, and people do have that response of, if I get around that, those people somehow that's going to rub off. But we don't have grief models anymore. And we're not taught to grieve. We're taught to acquire. We're not taught to lose. We're
Mm.
taught how to get the girl or get the guy, how to find the mate, but we're not taught what to do when that person's not with us anymore.
Well said.
In years of teaching university and college, especially teaching marriage and family, I would teach lifespan marriage, and a part of that would be an entire unit on when the spouse passes. When death occurs within the marriage, and but that was seen as obsolete. I actually had publishers say, well, you don't need to put that sort of stuff out there. That discourages people from getting married. Well, if you look at family trends, the average family in America today is good for about 5 years. But that's like people buying houses. And I think when we look at, the average family moves every 3 years, the average marriage lasts about 3 years, all these averages, so many people, I think, have postponed what living is. And living itself is death is part of life.
Right. Right.
When we
Well
look at
said. It's been around, since the beginning of mankind,
yes,
and yet we are so awkward with it. So let me ask you this: you're a sociologist, you're
yes,
a reverend or ordained, minister, and you've been a police chaplain. Your credentials is a mile long. So you're the best person to ask this question. How much grief training do clergy actually receive?
um, as clergy, one unit and one class. It's a part of a. It's just a part. It's a you take a ministerial counseling as a 3 hour course basically, and within that course it's a unit,
Yep.
and it's not adequate.
So one unit of one course.
And once again, it's not teaching you that when I when I tell pastors uh, just the physiology of grief, going into the actual brain
Yep.
reactions,
The biological response.
the biological response, the fight, flight, or freeze response that
Yep.
occurs because of the various brain hormones and chemicals that
Hmm.
are dumped from the trauma of the loss. the first word of the pastor was, I've never even occurred to me. I've never heard that. I didn't know that. And that sure explains a lot. And we're
Right,
not talking about a brand new pastor. We're talking about, when I talk to pastors, and even as a chaplain, the number of people that had no idea. They said, well, it's just an emotional thing that kind of clears up. And if we keep pointing them to God, the emotions will straighten out. And I'm going, well, no, there's all of these physical, there's behavioral, there's social.
right.
Life is never, and even last night to say to the class, life is never the same again. You make a new life where you
Right.
transfer the memory from active interaction to a memory. These are things that even the clergy sitting in the class say to me, I've never heard that.
Yeah.
I've never thought of that.
Well, and you think about it, and so just for our viewers to know, when we have a loss, especially a traumatic loss, one that would be unexpected, traumatic,
Right,
untimely, whatever you want to apply to it. What happens is the brain goes into fight, flight, or freeze, and
right,
it's a trauma response. And the adrenaline and the cortisol, they anesthetize certain parts of the brain, and that's why we get tunnel vision, we get time warp,
right,
auditory exclusion, and we recall things like almost like a strobe light rather than a full picture. We recall little snippets of time.
right,
And that's because certain parts of the brain have been anesthetized. The brain triggers the adrenaline and the cortisol so the body can respond, right, to
right,
fear
right.
is usually what it's responding to, and so that's what happens. And so it's not just an emotional response. Grief is a biological response, as you said. It's a behavioral response. It's also a spiritual response.
Very
And
much so.
loss of someone you love is a spiritual crisis for many people.
Yes, it is.
And again, it goes back to a lot of people, if you are ill, you go to the hospital. If you need comfort, you go see your clergy or you go to the church.
Right.
Yet a lot of churches aren't any better equipped to handle people who are grieving the loss of someone they love than someone next door. And so, how do we help churches do better? Because a lot of people do become disillusioned.
Yes,
That's
and
what you and I want to talk about, how we help churches do a better job, because people go there for comfort. And so, where do we start?
well, that's, right now I've got a real goal, a real personal goal, and that is to remake the thinking of modern church.
Mm,
I've been involved in ministry and churches all my life, but I've had 50 years active time working with churches, and I mean actively in ministry type roles, going
right.
all the way back to after high school. And
And your son's a pastor also.
yes, oh yes, and I come from a kind of family tradition. There's always, every generation's got several pastors in the generation going back to my great great grandfathers.
Yeah.
So the the thing here is that I've watched the church move away from being an extension of social institutions working together, meaning that this is the sociologist in me for a minute. Your classic institutions of family and economy and politics and religion, working, together to form an agreeable way of helping one another, instead have become very separated. Churches sees itself oftentimes, and modern clergy see themselves as at odds with the world that we're supposed to be working with. I
Mm,
mean, I look at my boss is God. My model is Jesus Christ. Do I live like most people might check off a list of perfection? I don't meet that. But what I do try to do is look at a Jesus that went into the streets.
Mm,
and went to the people and dealt with the issues of the people as they were. He didn't try to change them into something else and then deal with them.
right.
He met them at their grief. He
Where
met
they are. He
where
met
they
them where
were.
they were.
And I think that oftentimes we, as clergy, we might tend to talk about meeting people where they are, but there's the agenda that says we want them to be in our church. The beauty of being a police chaplain was I dealt with every denomination and actually worked with um, multiple religions, and the reason was because you wanted to, you set aside denominational differences for the sake of the people. And sometimes we forget. um, I think it just boils down to the many clergy are more concerned about the business of church, and I don't mean that as a bad thing. But the business of church, grief gets in the way. People dying get in the way when you get right down to it. Especially if, let's say, they live a natural lifespan because of the giving patterns to church. The older people are in church, the more percentage they tend to give, the more money they give, they pass. That's a loss of income to
Ah,
the business side of church. And the trying to keep people into the that's what I'm saying about trying to hold them socially into the group without recognizing that every death changes the status within every group of the person who experienced the loss.
mm, very true.
And so when you change that status, and yet it's not recognized by the bigger group. And so the church, for example, is it's a group of people, but within that group there's multiple subgroups, and within every subgroup the people occupy a status, and their behaviors are defined by the rules of the role that's defined by the group. Death changes that.
Yeah.
Once again, people don't know. This guy was the leader. He suddenly loses a child. He's no longer the leader. He loses his wife, and now he's grieving, and he's not the strong person to.
Right. Right. He's
So
a need to
people,
support himself. But I think also it goes even further. We now, many traditional funerals are replaced with celebrations of life.
yes,
And
but interment's been replaced by uh, cremation, and
well,
that's something
well,
huge.
right, but I think about in the church setting, the celebration of life. It's saying we need to celebrate that this person went home to be
Right,
with God, and
right.
a going home service or what have you. But what about the people left behind who are in need of that ritual, that funeral service ritual, as that starting gate for their own reconciliation journey? Remember,
Mourning is
they're learning to live
necessary.
with their loved one in their
Yeah,
heart instead of their arm. And so it's a really big process for them. And ritual, meaning a funeral service, is a starting gate of that journey for many people. But when we say it's a celebration of life, that says to me that I'm supposed to be celebrating, but I feel really, really sad inside.
right. Well, once again, even last night, I said, stop and think of the paradox internally. When on one hand we're supposed to rejoice that our loved one is now with Jesus, and on the other hand, I'm really sad that they're not with
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And I agree that by moving it into this idea of a big celebration, everybody's supposed to be happy. I've watched the memorial or the funeral change in behavior from the ones I did years ago to the ones that are expected today. People want to tell jokes, and they want everybody laughing, and they want to have music or the slideshow so that everybody can feel good.
Yeah.
And I think that when we disallow the right of the grief, when we disallow the physical expression through mourning, when that's, once again, the family's now moved. If they're going to mourn, if they're crying, there's a room off to the side. You go over there behind the curtain to
Yeah.
cry
Yeah. Out of
when
sight.
you're out here in public.
Yep.
But look at what, who, the big question, the question I posited last night again and again was, who taught you to mourn? Where did you learn to mourn? Uh, you know, what was your role model for mourning?
Right.
Uh,
Yep.
and more and more and more, the role models are movie stars or the compression of TV, where the person dies and there's the emotional scene. It lasts 3 minutes. It cuts to the next scene and
Yep.
everybody's laughing again.
Yep, yep. I have thought of that many, many times. As a bereaved mother, that's a raw point for me. And I think that had I not lost a child, I wouldn't have paid any mind to it. But now I'm very keenly aware that in the media, in movies and in sitcoms, when someone dies, they're giving very little uh, time, screen time to witness that and tend to it and nurture it and surround it with comfort before moving on in the plot. And so it does set up this societal thinking that that's how grief should be. um,
Yes.
and of course we know that's not reality. And
No, but
so,
the created emotion, Linda. I mean, think of how even the death scene in a TV show or a sitcom or a movie, the music is there. It builds an emotional response. You have this flood of
yeah,
emotion for that death, and then literally the music changes, the beat changes. There's a resurrection of living and joy and
yeah.
giggling or life or jokes or whatever.
It's an afterthought. It's in the rearview mirror.
and
And
and and so many people, you know one of the comments that came from a man last night in the class was, when I asked who taught you to mourn, he listed a series of movie stars, and the movie stars he listed were the classical supermen, the all male men that showed no grief under any circumstances, showed no mourning of any form in all of the films they ever did. They were the ones that basically got in the saddle and rode away.
like Clint Eastwood and
That was I
yeah,
was trying to not actually name them, but you're going to name them right off the bat because
yeah.
that's exactly Clint Eastwood, John Wayne,
Yep,
uh,
John Wayne.
uh,
Yeah, right.
Sylvester Stallone. I mean,
Yeah.
Rambo's
But
classic.
the truth is, if that were real life, they would be crying on the horse
Oh
as they're
yes,
riding
they
away.
would in
And
real
just
life.
they, because as humans, that's how we process deep anguish is through
Yes.
tears. Tears is a releasing of emotional buildup. God put that in us for a reason. And
Oh
to be
yes, he did.
denied that goes against God's will. And I think also, I think about the woman, crying on the floor of the bathroom in the church. You know, it's how do we move that out of behind closed doors back into where we surround them with love? Because God gave us a heart to be compassionate and empathetic toward other people. And so if we ignore their pain, that's not what God wanted. So how
No,
do we move
not
that
at
back
all.
into the church? How do we equip them with the tools that they need?
I think well, there's a series of things. One, I think every church, it would be my dream that every church would train clergy and laity in a very realistic, evidential evidentiary based classes in what grief and mourning really are. And because that's the first step. The second step, I think, is to, within the church itself, start giving permission for, and I mean literally giving permission for the show of emotion. Period.
Yeah.
It's I have an advantage. that I cry whenever I feel like it, and I don't worry about it. But the advantage is simple. I'm big enough, and nobody's going to tell me I can't. I used the
You know,
example last night of Rosie Greer, who used to needlepoint on the plane going to pro football games. And when he was interviewed, and somebody said, one of the sportscaster, who was a man, said, "Well, don't people make fun of you?" And he said, "Only the women," and then laughed, because the whole image of what it means,
yeah.
to be a man, what it means
Well,
to show emotion.
but
But
I
we've
think,
also become scared to console somebody else, that it
yeah.
might be misinterpreted.
Well, the truth is, you don't have to be skilled to comfort someone else. You
That
don't
is
have
true.
to be accredited or certified to
No,
comfort
no,
someone else. In fact, when people say, "What do I say? What do I do?" I give them my motto: listen, hug, repeat. You
yeah,
don't, there's no words that are going to fix it.
no,
And a hug is a classic, actions speak louder than words. When you hug them, you're giving them permission to grieve. You're saying, I've got a strong shoulder. I can't fix it, but I can hold the sacred space for you while you process it.
yes, very
That's
well
all we
put.
need to do. That's
Very
all we
well
need
put.
to do. If
Like I
words
told,
could fix it, we would have said them to ourselves.
right.
And so just God built in all of us that ability to love one another and to provide compassion to one another. He gave us that as a gift that we could minister to one another.
Oh, I
And so
agree.
when we deny that someone in pain that ministering, we deny them the very gifts God gave us.
Well, Scripture flat tells us we are a royal priesthood. And as a royal priesthood, together, it is our duty to provide comfort and care for one another.
Yep.
And I think that, once again, it's like I told people, they say, "Well, we don't know what to say." I said, "Don't say
Don't
anything.
say anything.
Just
Listen,
be
hug,
there."
repeat.
Yeah. And I like that. That's very good. I may borrow that for the
You
next
can, you're
class.
welcome to borrow and spread it far and wide.
Because I very much believe that to just be present, to
Yes.
be there, to be the
Active
shoulder
listening,
to cry on
compassionate
next to
listening,
somebody.
whatever you want to call it. I call it holding the sacred space, because to me, when someone has lost someone they love, that is a sacred moment in their life.
Yes.
And God knows their pain. And it's a pain that no words can describe. It's a sacred part of their life. And it's something that he holds dear to his heart, your pain. And
Yeah.
so when you hold that sacred space for someone in need, that is such a gift that you're giving them. Absolutely. I mean,
Well, I
that,
very much, God proved He understands human pain.
yep,
He proved that through the very process of the death of Christ. He proved that in so many respects. And the hole that is created when we lose someone, I think, when we can, that's in reconciliation of grief, learning how to find those things that remake life. But when you
yep,
stop and think, reaching out to others, sharing love with others becomes one of the things that allow us to work through our own grief. When we work through the process of hurting, to heal someone else, or to reach out to assist in the healing of another, is to heal yourself.
yep. She who
To
heals others heals herself. Absolutely.
love another is
Yep.
I mean, even the you can't pour from the empty glass. And
Yep.
they seemed kind of stunned. I said, if you're going to be spiritually uplifting to another, you need to practice things that make you spiritually uplifted.
Yes.
That,
Yep.
and maybe this is part of what's going on too, is that the the relegation of religious practice and belief to just a little bitty teeny part of the world for most people as well. we click it on, we click it off.
Mm.
And to make it something, when you tell a group of people that have been in church for they're there every Sunday, they're there every time it opens, and you say, hey, when you wake up in the morning, do you write down something you're thankful for? Or do you start off your day saying, I'm thankful for this? I said, we're all good at listing the things that we're grumpy about or that we're upset about, but expressing thanks for the things that we have instead of looking at the things we don't have. And then when we go to another that's experienced loss, and to be thankful for who they are, and not to be thankful that they had a loss, but to be thankful that we love them, to be thankful that we can love them.
Well, I think that the being able to be grateful is part of that process. In the very beginning, and I can only speak to myself because I have permission to share my own story. And, being grateful wasn't in my, on my radar. I was in so much emotional pain that being grateful I had no bandwidth left for that, but it did develop along the way.
Right,
And of
right,
course, now a grateful heart is a happy heart. And even though I've lost a daughter and I'm 10 years down the road, I am so grateful for all the collateral blessings that have come that wouldn't have come about any other way. And so but it's a process to get there. It takes
yes,
time because a lot of people are still, because they haven't been, because their pain has not been witnessed to, because they've not been given that permission to grieve, either by those around them or internally. They haven't reached that place of feeling that their heart can hold joy the same time as sorrow. And so once you reach that, then you start to become grateful for little things that wouldn't have come about. And it's hard to see them at first, though. So it truly is a process of learning to live with your loved one in your heart. It takes a while, I mean, years. And depending upon the relationship you had, and the personalities at play and all kinds of dynamics, but for many, if they're denied that opportunity to mourn, they never reach that reconciliation in their heart. And that's not what God wanted at all. So before we go, I want to share that in response to the need for grief support groups in the church, we have developed a new I Care Grief Support program. And it is Christ-centered. It is an 8-week grief group support that you can facilitate in your own church. The facilitator manual includes all the instructions, all the forms that you need to lead an 8-week grief support group in your church. And it's available online for purchase at icaregriefsupport.com/grief support, support groups, sorry. So icaregriefsupport.com, support groups. And Roland Johnson, Reverend Johnson here, actually co-created this with us at the International Grief Institute. So Roland, it's a pleasure for all your hard work. It's a pleasure to have you on the show tonight. You're always so interesting to talk to. And, we could cover so many more topics because, again, your credentials is a mile long. But thank you for all that you've done to help change the way that we support people who are grieving the loss of someone they love, today and for tomorrow. So thank you for all that you've done. And thank you for helping to create the I Care Grief Support Group for churches, to give them the tools to minister to their own congregants. So thank you. That's incredible, incredible. So how can our viewers contact you if they have a question?
They're more than welcome to email me. The link is, I think you put it up on the website. As far as I'm concerned, I don't mind if people call me. Unfortunately, they usually have to leave a voicemail, and I'd call them back um, if they wish. Once again,
How about Facebook? Is that a good place to send you a
Facebook's
message?
a great
Okay,
place. Yeah,
awesome.
I'm learning. My kids made me become a little more competent. My grandkids are really pushing me, um, And so, yes, I'm actually on Facebook now. Uh,
Okay.
just Roland H. Johnson the third, and
Okay. And then you also have a website, outsidewalls.org.
yes,
Okay. And
and
that's
and
for,
that's a place too. It's I had an online church for 25 years. I took it down, and this is a new venture, but I it's an easy way for people to contact me or to uh, private chat if somebody needs that. It's very available.
okay.
I enjoy my retirement.
You're too busy to be retired.
But
So,
life
all
is
right,
amazing.
my friend. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the show tonight. You're a pleasure to talk to, and I really appreciate your time. So, viewers, thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions for Reverend Johnson, you can reach him at outsidewalls.org or on Facebook. So, take care, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, Linda. Have a good
Take care. Bye bye. Have a good
bye
night.
bye.